Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of the Quick Corners Book Corner. Yes, still celebrating World Book and Copyright Day. I had the pleasure of meeting the next author last year. You'll see why I say it's a pleasure. Well, with every author, it's a pleasure. See you in a bit. Welcome back to the Quick Corners Book Corner, Ava.
Thank you so much for having me again. Last time we got to talk about some really good things. And I got to introduce my book, Value, Things I Wish My Mom Would Have Told Me. And now it's so crazy how time moves so quickly. Because at this point now, I wrote this book in 2020.
Yeah.
Like the pandemic is still going on, but kind of like at the height of the pandemic because we had time. And now it's been more than a year.
Yeah.
And we are still, chugging along, and the book has seen some good success, and I'm excited about 2022 and continuing that.
Yeah. So highlights again from the book, because some people may not have watched the initial video.
Yes, absolutely. So this book, again, was like, I feel like decades in the making. I wanted to write something for a very long time. I'm a school social worker. I have been for 16 years. So I work with children and adolescents mostly. I also work in private practice where I work with children and adolescents. And I oftentimes would share my stories with my students and with my clients, mostly to let them know that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And that they can see someone who's been through some of the things maybe that they've been through, who they see as successful, who they maybe look up to. And so some of the topics that I address in my book are parental incarceration and divorce, and mental health and drug addiction and homelessness. So those were just some of the things that I dealt with. And kind of the premise of this book is, me going through these things as a young girl and kind of looking to my mom, especially for guidance and for advice, and her not being able to provide that for me at the time as much maybe as she would have liked to have done, just because, it's her story too. Like she's the one who's going through this stuff, and just kind of how I dealt with it at the time. I wrote a lot. I had a diary that someone had given me when I was in 7th grade. So I had like years worth of these diary entries where I would write like what was happening and how I was feeling. And so that was how, I didn't know it then, but that was how I was coping. So that was the premise behind Things I Wish My Mom Would Have Told Me, just how I dealt with that trauma, how I made it through, how my relationship with my mom evolved and grew, and it has grown stronger actually since I wrote the book, which is pretty cool. So, and then an important piece of the book is that writing piece, that narrative. So there's journal prompts at the end of each chapter for the reader to kind of go through and process some things as well.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that, some of the other authors I have interviewed have shared is how their story has helped others, and I continue to say, yes, when we tell our stories, it gives people the courage to, one, sometimes accept and articulate their own stories, and secondly, recognize that things can be better.
Yes.
Yeah. And you said that, the book has had much success. So how have you seen people use your book as the tool towards self-discovery, self-liberation?
Yeah. So one of my things, and this has always kind of been a theme for me, and something I share with like clients and students all the time. And what you were saying, you share too, people share their story. And it's that theme of turning pain into purpose, right? Like if we feel like there's meaning to our life, we're better able to handle it versus, not knowing why things are happening to us, or just allowing things to happen to us.
Yeah.
And again, feeling like you're the only one, right? So when we tell our stories and we're sharing with people, we're able to do that.
Mhm.
I will tell you that every time like someone, mentions it to me, or mentions to me a way that they use the book, I am like just deeply, deeply humbled. Like deeply humbled. I had a young lady who's a school social worker actually in Chicago, reached out to me and she said, we bought 25 books and we're running a group with the students at our school and they're really resonating with your story. We're going to purchase 25 more. Can we get you to come out and speak to them? And I'm just like, absolutely, like,
Yeah.
absolutely. I've gotten a chance to present to my fellow school social workers. I've gotten a chance to present to parents even, and using some of the tips in these books, in my book, to help them with their teenagers and, their children, just giving them tips on how to listen and, how to help students become more self-aware and, manage their emotions and things like that. So that has been, like I said, just incredibly humbling every time someone says, I got the book, I read the first chapter and I already see so much of myself, or I did the first journal prompt and I'm buying a journal so that I can write more. So those are just some of the things that I've heard and some of the things that I've gotten to do. Just presenting and sharing my story has been awesome. I'll say only like recently I shared like a small portion, like a little chapter with a student, or a young person that I was working with, and I was like, yes, this is a time. Like they were talking. Well, they weren't really talking. They weren't sharing at all. Um, and so, I was like, well, let me share something with you. And then after I shared it, they kind of looked, and then that helped them to open up more, because it's like, oh, like she really does know what I'm going through.
Yeah.
So it's been amazing. And like I said, humbling.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being courageous enough to, and yeah, courageous. I think courageous is the right word. Being courageous and also vulnerable to
Yeah.
say, I may look all put together, but here are the pieces that I used for this quilt.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Here are the pieces, right? The pieces that I use to put myself together. That's been kind of a theme too. I had some good friends of mine say like, I never would have known. And I'm like, no, you would not have, because it's not something that I share all the time.
Mhm.
I'm just like you said, people see me and I look put together. I'm just like, yeah, I just popped out and I'm just like this.
I was born like
I
this.
was born like this, right? And it's like, no, I was a very shy and insecure young person, like many, like a lot of people. And these are the things that, I've been through. And I think sometimes people don't notice too, because when they hear me like talk about my parents now too, it's literally like night and day. So people can't even see, um, it's hard, I think, for people to put that
Connect the
together,
dots.
to connect those dots, because when they see my mom or they see even my dad, they're like, and I'm like, well, that's partly the God factor too. You just don't look like what you've been through.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. We don't look like what we've been through for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. As I think about all the talk about, going through the pandemic still and people having challenges with mental health, depending
Mm-hmm.
on what they're going through, how do you hope your book would help your readers in these times?
You know, I really feel like the pandemic it is a form of trauma in a sense, and it's a collective trauma because we're going through it together. It's a global thing, our way of life was completely changed like in a matter of like a day. It was just like
Mm-hmm.
one day, literally, I was on a plane, hanging out in Miami, and then, the next day school was shut down and everything has changed.
Yeah.
And I feel like for our young people, and maybe because I work with young people, it's had kind of the biggest impact. They've had a hard time transitioning back to school. We've seen higher numbers of anxiety and depression and aggression as well, because everybody handles trauma differently, you know? So sometimes when kids are fighting and they're really aggressive, people are like, what is that about? And I'm like, it's the same thing that, you know, a kid who's withdrawn is about. Everybody's different though. They're not gonna show it in the same way.
Same way.
Yeah. In fact, I was reading an article about the government declaring like a state of emergency, a mental health crisis for our young people. Because, you know, mental health, I mean, our regular hospitals are crowded, right? But
Yeah.
mental health hospitals are crowded, and young people are having to wait for beds, you know, for inpatient treatment, and waiting lists to see a therapist are like miles long because everyone needs help right now. Everyone needs help right now. And so what I'm hoping my book and even other books like it will just help, you know, be a little piece of the puzzle, again, for, you know, women, people, young people, older people. It doesn't even matter, to just kind of read and work through,
Yeah.
and kind of get them started on that healing journey. That's hopefully the goal.
Okay. Well, thank you. And, you know, from your last visit, we have information on how people can get copies of your books. So we'll add that below this video.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining me in the Good Corners Book Corner, Ava.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Yes, lots to think about based on Ava's book, right? And I was saying to her later that there are some people who, in reading her book, realize that they don't need to shy away from their stories. They can step up, own their stories, and change their stories, and also use their stories to change other people's lives. You'll see information on how you can get copies of her book below this video. See you in the next episode of The Quick Corner. Bye now.